I really like what Pam said. You know, sometimes God needs us available more than our abilities. So bear all that in mind tonight. It's always funny when I do one of these talks. I put a lot of prayer into it because there's a lot of things you can talk about. But is that really what God needs you to talk about? And usually, I'll put some prayer into it, some thought into it, and God will kind of give me some hints. Yeah, that's what I want you to do. Well, this time I really didn't get too many hints, but I thought, okay, I'm going to go ahead with it until I came in tonight. I didn't make it to church this morning. I was a little bit under the weather, and I wanted to make sure I could do this tonight. So I didn't get a bulletin until when I came in. But when I did look at my bulletin, I don't know who, maybe Sam did the bulletin for our legal one. And, there's always a little line, one line in the bulletins. And today it says, if you fear something, if you fear someone will find out, they'll do it. And that's really nice because no one had a clue what I was going to talk about, but that's what I want to talk about tonight is fear. So that always encourages my heart because, like I say, God always gives me a little hint which direction to go in. We're into the new year, and one of the responsibilities I have at my job in the new year is we always have a business development meeting. Usually a nice warm place. This year it was Texas. So I was down there a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things they always sit down and they talk about is, what did we do last year? What good things did we do? And things that didn't go so well. What's our plans for the new year? And what's our fears and our risks and our challenges? And just sitting in that meeting, I kind of got thinking about fears. In our world today, there's a lot to be fearful of. If you look at the political side of it, there's, the gun violence issue and the debt crisis. And, all you have to do is turn the TV on, and there's a plethora of fear out there. So I thought, that might be a good topic to talk about. If you turn your Bibles with me to Genesis chapter 3, we're going to look at verses 8 through 10. And when you start thinking about fear and you start kind of preparing to talk about fear, one of the things I did, I thought, okay, where does fear start at? Fear's been around for a long time. Anything that's in Genesis has been around for a long time. And if you look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 8, it says, And they heard the voice of the Lord walking in the gardens in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I hear thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid. So, fear is not a new thing. Fear has been around since the Garden of Eden. And the Bible talks a lot about fear, about being afraid. I looked up in my Strong's Concordance. The word afraid is listed 193 times. And the word fear, and fear has some different meanings, but the word itself is listed 404 times. We're not going to go through each one tonight, so rest easy. But it's been around a long time. It's mentioned a lot in the Bible, and I think it's something occasionally we need to kind of look at and talk about. And what is fear? And what does it mean to be afraid? You look up 2 or 3 different dictionaries and kind of average what they say. Fear is an uneasy feeling of dread. It's like an internal alarm that something bad is going to happen. It can be caused by a threat, a feeling, the loss of control. A good example of that happened to me last October. The company I work for, and this is going to sound trivial, but this is an everyday thing. The company I work for was bought out by a much larger company. So they're integrating these two bodies. And the group I work with is about the laid-back, most bunch of people you could ever be associated with. And our new masters are very formal, very straight-laced. We have guys that's worked there 30 years that had to go buy a tie. You know, because we never needed one before. So we were going to go to see a high-profile client, kind of en masse together. So the night before, they decided to have a meeting in Pittsburgh so we could introduce ourselves and everything. So you know, I went to this meeting, a little bit nervous because these were all new people, and people started passing back and forth business cards. And I was a little outnumbered. There was myself and one guy that works with me out of Morgantown, and there's about 12 of these other dudes. And I started looking at these guys' business cards, and I noticed Senior Vice President, PhD, Doctor, you know, lots of stuff on the business cards. You know, look at mine, it says Chris Buckley, cell phone number. And the guy that does the other part of our business, Jason Piot, that's about what his says. It says Jason Piot, salesman. No little numbers or letters or anything before or after our names. So it was a little bit intimidating. But, you know, they seem to be nice fellows, and they put their pants on just like we do. So the next day we get ready to go to the meeting, and Jason's wife decides to have a baby. So I was really outnumbered then. And like I say, we show up at this meeting, and I was dressed probably just about like I am right now. And, you know, these guys, like I say, they had some pretty nice $1,000 suits and nice ties. And I don't know if you call it fear, but it was definitely nervousness. Because this is a pretty high-profile executive client we were going to go see. And so he had us sat down around a table. Of course, everybody hands out their business cards. And he goes through them, looks at the person, asks issue, and kind of, you know, what's this really mean that you do? And I was last. And he looked at me and he said, "Now you're the equipment guy, right?" And I said, "The equipment guy." He said, "You're the guy really going to talk." He just kind of swept all them other cards over. And so my fears were alleviated, but I was really nervous at that point. That's a fear. You know, that's doesn't sound like much, but I mean, that's the kind of thing, you know, I think can get to us worse than the big time fears. It's that uneasy feeling of dread. Another definition of fear is that it's a falsehood. You know, it just looks scary at the time. And my mom, bless her heart, would never let me live this down. When I was learning to drive, of course I was way smarter than she was, and I was doing fine driving. And my birthday was in October. And that year we had an early snow and, you know, kind of icy roads. And you know, of course I had no fear. Then I had to drive across the Fort Neal Bridge. Anybody remember the Fort Neal Bridge? It was metal. You know, had a steel floor on it. It was narrow at both ends. And if it was icy, it was really bad. Well, it looked really scary at the time. And my mom happened to be riding with me the first time I crossed it, driving by myself. And I told her, I said, "This is really scary." And so, you know, from then on, she never let me look that down. Now, I've driven a lot of roads that look a lot scarier since then. But, you know, there again, fear can be a falsehood, something that's just scary at the time. And, you know, another definition of fear, and I've heard Zig Ziglar throw this around and several other speakers, so I'm not really sure where it came from, but, you know, they describe fear as false evidence appearing real. You know, if you think about things, there's two things in life that have the biggest anticipation and the greatest letdown. And anticipation is one of them, and fear. Fear is the other. You know, if you have it in your mind that you're afraid of something, and you approach something, and you agonize over it, and then it really happens, and it's really not a big deal, you're letdown. So, that's a kind of one of the attributes of fear. There's a lot of examples of fear in the Bible. I said, they talked about it 404 times. One of them that jumps out that probably all of us have heard, maybe not thought about that part of it, is in Luke. So I'd like to look at Luke chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. This is a pretty familiar story. It's the story of the birth of Jesus. In chapter 9, verse 9, it says, "Lo, the angel of the Lord appeared unto them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said to them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which will be to all people." When you look at instances in the Bible where they talk about fear, a lot of times you'll see the supernatural becoming involved in the natural. Time after time, when people see angels, the angel will tell them, "Do not be afraid." And that's one of the aspects of fear, that when we see something that's beyond our norm, beyond our thinking, our common response is fear. When we run into something that's unexpected or out of our control, several years ago, my cousin works construction. He was in California, and they had an earthquake. Well, he'd never experienced an earthquake. He said, you can hear about an earthquake on television, but when you're laying in bed, the next minute it throws you onto the floor, it's a whole different deal. And he said, scared to death. He said, I've seen tornadoes, lightning storms, and floods. He said, I was no way prepared for an earthquake. And so, there's a sense of fear brought on by something that was totally unexpected and out of our norm. So fear can come at us in a lot of ways. Like I say, it can come at us when things are out of our norm, or there's times, I believe even today, where the supernatural blends in with the natural, and it can cause fear. If you go to go online and you look up types of fears and types of phobias, there's just page after page after page of all these different phobias. Most of them I can't pronounce, but we have our everyday kind of fears. We have people who are afraid of heights and oceans and darkness, close places, ladders and dogs and horses. Public speaking, which was really a big one, right up near the top. And an interesting fact about that is that last year there was 9 billion public addresses, and only 3 people died while doing it. So if you're afraid of public speaking, odds are you can get by and it would be okay. I like another one that was near the top was fear of rejection, and I always call that the salesman's plight. They drum into us all the time. We go to sales training and stuff. The customer says no to you, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting what you offer. But so many people are afraid of rejection, so they won't take that extra step to kind of close that sale. That was another big one. And fears aren't all bad. A healthy fear is good. We just don't want it to consume us, to overwhelm us. That's when fears become bad and they become a problem. Fears can also, be linked to deeds, to emotions, and things that are negative. If you think about greed's a fear of not having enough, regardless of what that is. Kind of back to rejection. A lot of people are fearful of not being accepted, so they may not do the next step. You know, jealousy. That's probably led by fear. Fear that we're not going to get what we want, we're going to be with who we want to be. I was watching that show, Buried Alive, about the hoarders, where the people just buy stuff. And they talk a lot of times about, that's a fear. And that behavior is driven by fear. Guilt says foolish things. Not having a nice tractor. A lot of people are afraid just because they want to, they don't want to step out. They want to be in the norm. They don't want to be, they're afraid of not being in the norm. And so, a lot of people play this game trying to keep up with the Smith and Joneses. That can lead to problems with your finances or your relationships. Procrastination. I suffer from that on some things. And a lot of people just put off doing stuff because they're afraid. My part's probably more laziness than fear. How many people are afraid of just admitting they're wrong? I have people I work with who argue all day long that these seats are green, not blue, because they don't want to be wrong. How many people don't take responsibility because they're afraid what will happen? I had an incident happen 2 weeks ago Sunday. I was hurrying to go to the airport in Columbus. And I always wear my seatbelt. Most of the time, I drive in the speed limit. Well, that Sunday morning, it was a madhouse at my house. And I got in my vehicle and was thinking about the week ahead, really not what's going on. I didn't get very far from home before I got pulled over. And a guy walked up, he said, "You were just speeding a little bit." He said, "I know you don't have your seatbelt on." And I thought, well, I didn't argue with the guy. No, I didn't have it on. And in that case, I'm thinking, okay, I'm probably going to be in trouble at work because they frown on you not wearing your seatbelt. I'm going to be in trouble with my wife because I have a fine. I'm going to be in trouble with the airlines because if this guy holds me up very long, I'm not going to make my plane. But, you have to live through them fears and just take responsibility. I wouldn't pay enough attention how fast I was driving. And I didn't do the right thing, which is wearing my seatbelt. But I think that's an important thing sometimes. If we have responsibility, we don't let our fears stop us from doing it. I always like to ask the questions when I'm doing these. One question I have is, why are we afraid? And some people say, well, that's just part of our human nature. But I don't think fear is not from God. If we look on 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind." God doesn't want us to live in fear. It's part of human nature. But like many things, it's something that's in our nature that God can use to help us. And will help us work through another way that we can, put our faith in Him. So, if it's not from God, I think a lot of times some of the fears we have are from the devil. I think fear is a wonderful opportunity for Satan to do what he can to help us turn away from God. I think our parents are a little bit to blame too. We talk about fears. Some fears we have as adults, we learned as children. And we may have parents or elders that wanted to train us and protect us, but they ingrained fear. I grew up out west, and we lived in the desert. And we had really big, really mean rattlesnakes. And from a very young child, we had one philosophy at our house: if it was a snake, kill it. And don't mess with it. Because 9 times out of 10, it could cause you a lot of trouble. Now, I had never grown past that fear, I guess. So I still have the same philosophy. If I see a snake, and I don't care if it's a perfectly harmless little garden snake, I'm afraid I kill it. But there's lessons that we've learned and it's ingrained in us. I have a dear friend of mine, and we went. She's been with us on vacation and stuff several times, and the first time we went to the ocean, she said, "I don't go in the water because I'm afraid of the water." As Mom always told us, you can't get in the water if you'll drown. Well, this lady is 50 years old, in her 50s, the first time we went to the beach. So of course, take myself, my brother-in-law, and some of us ornery guys. First thing we did is pick her up and throw her in the ocean. And wrong thing to do, because I thought we were going to take her to the hospital. And, I've seen her wade in a pond, swim in a swimming pool at my house. You put her in an ocean, she just completely freaks out. That's a childhood fear someone taught her she's never got past. So that's some fears we have could be from childhood lessons. I think our imagination sometimes, in our own minds, can generate fear. Sometimes we think too much if we're in a situation. One of the things that in my past life I've done is we used to rebuild equipment. They were big, tall towers. You'd have to climb up to the top. It's a steel vessel. You'd have to go down through a series of trades. And it's absolutely pitch dark. And it's confined. And it takes a special individual, because you just can't be afraid of tight places, and you've got to keep your cool. And one of the guys I used to work with, always calm and collected, one day, he hollered up at me and he said, "Hey," I said, "What?" He said, "I have 2 problems." I said, "Okay." He said, "Number 1, I'm stuck. And number 2, I can't find my light." And he was very cool. He said, "I'll sit here for a little bit, calm down, and I'll wiggle myself out." But I'm sitting at the end, and my fear level's going up because I'm thinking, gee, I'm responsible for him. How are we going to get him out of there? How bad is he stuck? And, my mind just ran away with stuff. So he remained calm. I got twisted around where he got unstuck, found his light. We had some laughs about it, but there's a deal where my imagination generated a bunch of fear. I'm glad his did, because we didn't want to happen was for him to be scared there. I think sometimes fears comes from a poor self-image. We all want to be accepted. And we all think we look nice. We all think we're the smartest. But sometimes our thoughts about ourselves can get smashed by the actions of other people. So, sometimes fears can be generated from that. I think sometimes we just get wore down and we have fears that are generated by doubt. Sometimes we doubt ourselves. And sometimes I think for the truth, we doubt God. And, fear replaces trust. Fear is a powerful motivator. And, I've heard people that are good Christians that are in bad situations that, they have doubts and fears, and it really pushes their trust. Why did God put me in this situation? why would he do that? But, doubt is something that can really promote fear. And, I thought we talked a little bit about what are the results of fear. If nothing else, fear can cause you to play mind games with yourself. That's how I kind of think of it. We can become fearful and worry about something to the point that it consumes us. We can't concentrate on other things that we need to do. And I think if we're in that state, sometimes that fear can cause us to act wrongly, make wrong or bad decisions. But we're relying on that fear to drive us instead of maybe the rational thought or, input from God and trusting God. And I think fear can paralyze. There's times that you can be so afraid that you need to make a decision and you're limited in making that decision by the fear. So it paralyzes you. And I think fear can enslave. If you're so fearful of something and it consumes you, you don't want to go ahead and make that decision. You're just eat up with it. You're just consumed by fear. So it can enslave you. Fear can destroy relationships. Destroy relationships with people. It can destroy relationships with, the relationship with God. There's a lot of things that fear can destroy. It can also steal your peace and your joy. We make a piece of equipment, it's called a spill column at work, and steam runs up and fluid runs down. And the joke is you can only put so much in a spill column. People start making too much steam, pulls the water overhead. Start making too much water, won't let steam come up. So we kind of have a joke about it. But our psyche's a little bit like that. We're going to have some fear. We should have some joy and peace too. If things get out of balance, that fear grows, it shoves out that joy and peace. So it can steal your joy and peace. I think fear can also block you spiritually for the good things that God has for you. Maybe God's putting on your heart to take that step up and volunteer to be a Sunday school teacher. Maybe God's put it in your heart to, pray out loud in church. Maybe you got a bonus at work. God's put it in your heart to put that in the offering plate. You're fearful to do that for one of those steps. And I think when that happens, that can block you spiritually from what God has for you. And if you look at it just from a purely human standpoint, I think it affects your health. I think people that are fearful to the point where, they're consumed, they're going to feel bad, maybe. My little episode I had in Morgantown a couple of years ago, heart stopped twice. And, a day after that, I lay in bed at night getting ready to go to bed, and you're thinking, gee, this has happened to me. It'll make you afraid. I'd lay there, and the more I think about it, I could, it's quiet, you can actually hear your heart beat, and then you're thinking, is that right? Is it beating too fast, beating too slow? I mean, our minds can affect things that go on with our bodies. So, fear has some bad things. It can affect your health and your mind. So, we kind of talked about some of the things that fear is. Now, what can we do to deal with fear? I think the very first thing we need to do is we need to own it. If we have a fear that's becoming a problem, I think we need to acknowledge it to ourselves that I've got a fear that's become a problem. And once we do that, maybe identify what that fear stems from. I mean, a fear could be a consequence of a past choice or an action you did. Or it could be a fear that you're just making up in your mind because you're letting your mind just, run ahead with fear. But if we own that we have a fear and we try to figure out where that's coming from, is it based on our past? Is it just our mind, working overtime? I think once we do those two things, then we can address the problem, or we can address the fear. There again, Zig Ziglar, one of my heroes, he's passed away last year and went to the Lord now, but he always had a saying for everything, and a really good way about saying it. Two he had for fear was, faith is fear in reverse. Encourage is fear that said its prayers and decided to go forward anyhow. And so, we own it, we identify it. When we do those two things, I think what we need to do is we need to change our focus a little bit. I think we need to turn away from that fear. I think we need to turn to God and God's love for us. And, look for answers. We can look for answers in the Bible. We can tell our problems to God in prayers. We can talk to people at church, other Christians that we know. There's a lot of things that we can turn our focus away from that fear onto something else. It's like anything. If you laser beam focus your attention on it, you can do something about it. You can, if you laser beam focus all your attention on a fear, that fear is only going to grow and get worse. If you laser beam focus all your attention on, God's there to help you work out that problem, it's only going to get better. All kinds of places in the Scripture where it talks about God there to support us and help us through those fears. I'd like to look at a couple of them. First one that jumps to my mind is Philippians 4:13. It says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, we're in a situation where we think we're not powerful enough to take care of it. We can always go and God will back us up. On any situation. It doesn't have to just be fear. A couple other verses that I always like to look through when we're talking about fear. Isaiah 41:10. It's fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, will help thee. Yea, will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. And another one is 1 John 4:16-18. And we have known and believed the love that God hath to us. God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Here our love is made perfect, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because he is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not perfect in love. And there's probably other countless verses we could look at in the Bible. God will help us with that fear in our lives and help us work through that. I think, that's just part of our spiritual walk. God tells us that he'll be there with us and help us through these things. I think we want to believe that. Make it our anchor. You have a fear that you're trying to work through, read them verses, read them 3 times a day. Make them your anchor. And things will get better. Nothing beats laying down any of your problems and your fears by just talking to God. Prayer is good in all situations. it's not just good in foxholes, it's good everywhere. So, I think the more that we can, look at our fears or our problems and talk about them, I think it will be way ahead. Something's kind of interesting, and I've looked through a bunch of verses trying to pick out some tonight, but I couldn't find one where God said that He'll remove fears from our lives. He'll help us. But I think there's a reason in His divine plan that they're there. He'll help us work through it. And He may remove some. But I've never seen any place where it says He'll remove all. So, I think we have to be soft. If we have a fear, what we're going to do with that fear? Are we going to continue to support that fear and have it grow with all the problems? Or are we going to, live with them and trust God to make them better? And ask God to remove that fear from our circumstances. I think it's up to us, but I'm a firm believer if we put our trust in God and place our fear in His hands, that He will strengthen us and help sustain us through those fears.